on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, further fractures in the Albanese government, with a Labor senator defying the Prime Minister with inflammatory comments about the Israel-Hamas war. Douglas Murray joins me shortly to discuss migration rates and why the will of the majority is consistently ignored. Hollywood A-listers come out in support for cancelled Oscar winner Kevin Spacey. I'll speak to Kinsey Schofield about that shortly. And what is the most powerful interest group we've seen in this country? Nick Cater will join me to discuss that. But it's time to bring in Sky News contributor Kosha Gator for the day's big stories. Kosha, I'll be talking to Douglas Murray shortly about migration numbers. It's a massive issue across Europe, in the US, right here in Australia. And the Albanese government is under intense pressure to drastically cut net overseas migration from the record 528,000 we had last year to a promised 260,000 next year. But as Pauline Hanson noted on X, Labor doesn't have a great track record in predicting net migration numbers accurately. Over the past 2 years, migration has reached a record 923,000, which is 208,000 more than Labor anticipated. Hanson wrote, two questions, Kosha. Can Labor quit their high migration habit? They've seemed to have relied on that, and they're not alone. Coalition governments have also indulged in that activity. And can we trust their figures? Are their predictions so far out that it's almost a fantasy number at the moment?
Probably a little bit of both. So the discrepancy in the numbers just fits what we've seen with government. They haven't exactly covered themselves in glory in terms of their ability to report numbers accurately and model. As we've seen in many venues, the more cynical interpretation would be that maybe they well knew, but this is a very unpopular topic, so it's easier to sort of dampen the expectation a little bit and then say, oops, sorry, we miscalculated. But be that as it may, Senator Hanson's point is very well taken. This is an issue all around the world, as you said. It's the issue of our time. And those numbers, 923,000, is roughly the population of Canberra. So a whole Canberra is going to be hosted in Sydney and in Melbourne, and that's kind of where these migrants concentrate, and all the stress that puts on infrastructure, on everything else, not to mention the fabric of the culture. And this is another topic that's very timely right now in terms of how these different groups come in, and then there's just more strife between groups ethnically as well. So all of that is a predictable consequence of this. Constituents don't want it, and yet it continues.
Well, you can see why the Albanese government is pledging to drastically cut these numbers. They're getting prepared for the next federal election, and they know this is an enormous issue out there. Now let's talk about Labor Senator Fatima Payman, who is calling on the Albanese government to sanction and disinvest from Israel, accusing the country of genocide against the Palestinian people.
How many mass graves need to be uncovered before we say enough? How many images of bloodied limbs of murdered children must we see? How many horrors need to be repeated before we feel that this should end? How many Palestinian lives are enough to call this violence against them terrorism?
Kosha, she also used the phrase from the river to the sea, which the Prime Minister has been clear to condemn, to say that it's a statement that promotes violence. And here he's got a senator saying it.
He's got a problem on his hands, as do his counterparts everywhere. So I look at the senator, the same thing with the United States Congress, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. It comes downstream from immigration, that topic we talked about again. This is some of those longer term consequences, whether intended or unintended, coming home to roost in many ways, but right within the left side of politics in liberal democracies, it's really coming home to roost because there's a huge refracturing and realignment of the fault lines in that party. And I think that colors what you see in terms of their positions with respect to Israel, with respect to protesters, with all of that, because they're kind of speaking, they've become a two-headed beast in a way, and they're speaking to two factions that don't agree on this issue.
That's there. The Biden administration has got these issues as well. And talking about the left of politics, Senator Lydia Thorpe has posted this image of herself with the message, Got my keffiyeh on for Parliament today. Power to all the students camped out and everyone that's been coming to rallies and standing up for justice. Shame on Vic Labor for banning keffiyehs in Parliament there. A real gammon lot they are. Free Palestine. Really, the Australian Upper House is disgracing itself. What did Paul Keating call them? Unrepresentative swill. I think he was being kind. Now let's move on to Albo evicting one of his tenants from one of his investment properties. This is an incredible story. Jim Flanagan was handed an eviction notice on the 8th of May to vacate the 3-bedroom townhouse where he's lived for 4 years. The PM has said, I've had him in the property with the rent being about half what is the market rent to keep him in for longer. So this is very interesting indeed. The PM must be a saint just giving away free rent there, essentially. But I do question the wisdom of evicting a tenant during his prime ministership. You would just think, yeah, sure, if you were an everyday, ordinary person who wasn't in public office, you may make this decision, but the optics here are not great.
That's a very interesting point. You could say that it's principled, and he's saying, hey, if I want to evict my tenant, I'm going to do that, and I guess that's right. You could say it would be nice if our leaders showed principled consistency on all sorts of other issues, including ones that don't directly affect them. But I think it's a fair argument on the facts of the case. It's his right as a landlord to do that. But the optics are interesting, and he's injected something that becomes a proxy story for all sorts of issues people have with housing and rent prices and cost of living and all of that. They can project onto those pain points, and he's invited that upon himself.
And this is very different to that image of himself that is cultivated. He grew up in a commission house. He's from Labor's socialist left faction, and yet he's got multi-million-dollar investment properties.
Yep.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying when you fight the culture wars and also, paint this image of I'm fighting the Tories and the rich don't do this and the rich don't do that, and you're part of the...
True. All around the world, the zip code outside DC is the wealthiest zip code in the world, one of them, and it's the same point.
Absolutely. Now, Liberal Senator Alex Antic has called out big tech companies who employ former intelligence employees and conspire with governments to censor and ban speech.
Big tech is the perfect intersection between government, the ruling class and the intelligence services along with their mates in big business. You see what they want you to see. Australia is at the tip of the spear of the global censorship movement, and I suspect that many who are involved are blissfully unaware and think that they're doing the right thing by shutting down and deleting so-called mis- and disinformation. But let's be clear, the government isn't thinking about your safety, and it doesn't care about misinformation. What it cares about is making sure that you see an approved message at all times.
What is said in Parliament this week has been established by investigative journalist Kosher, including Michael Schellenberger, who we've interviewed on this program. This is a huge issue because these platforms are now the digital public square. This is where people discuss issues, but this is where they find out information.
It is. He's one of the few elected leaders direct enough and brave enough to say that. It really is a convergence of all these power structures. As he mentioned, it's big tech, it's government, people who aid and abet it, like the E-Safety Commissioner and others, and just other people at the top, the ruling class, I think, as he put it, is the issue. We've called it the battlefield of the century in a way. It's another day in that movement. The problem is that for a country like Australia, certainly we shouldn't be aiding and abetting things like with the E-Safety Commissioner, but there's little recourse, little remedy we really have in terms of trying to break up that power that big tech plays in it, since they're all headquartered in the United States. That's the belly of the beast, where something has to happen along the lines of antitrust law, along the lines of Section 230, where they're not penalised.
The problem is we seem to be among some of the worst in the free world in suppressing free speech. So not only are we not fighting it, we seem to be one of the worst in aiding and abetting it. Kosher Gator, thank you so much for your time this evening. Joining me now is the author of international bestsellers, The Strange Death of Europe, The Madness of Crowds, and his latest work, The War on the West. Douglas Murray, let's start with immigration. It's a big issue in Australia. We're seeing record numbers of migrants coming in, despite polls showing the majority of Australians want to see immigration numbers drop. And that is also the overwhelming sentiment across Europe, with a recent poll taken in March and April this year showing great opposition to not only illegal immigration, but also the current volume of migrants coming into Europe. More than 70% said their country takes in too many migrants, and that includes countries as diverse as Sweden to Spain to Austria. The Greeks are the most opposed to their migration numbers. 90% there say that country takes too many. And yet, Douglas, the will of the majority seems to be completely ignored, whether it's Australia or Europe. When it comes to migration policy, majority opinion doesn't seem to matter much.
Absolutely, Rita. And these latest findings in Australia and across Europe are replicated, of course, in America. I mean, most people in the developed world, most people in the countries that people want to come to, are aware that we just can't take in all of the people who would like to come to our countries. I mean, Australia is in a much better position societally, financially, socially, and much more than most countries in the region. And it's the same with Europe. Europe's freer, more prosperous, infinitely more prosperous, even at the lowest rung of the ladder than most of the countries that people come to there from. And it's the same with America, with Central America and Southern America. And so the publics know this. But the political response, as you just referred to, seems to always be, whoever you have in power, more of the same. I mean, there are occasionally prime ministers and presidents who are able to slow down the flow. But even then, it's to a barely manageable level. And what these political leaders don't realize is that the public know more than them. We, the public, sense in the decline in trust, in the decline in safety, in all sorts of things, we sense what the changes are that happen, not when migration happens, but when too much migration happens too fast and often of the wrong kind. And I think, this is the big challenge of the 21st century. And so far, we haven't really thrown up politicians capable of dealing with it.
And it seems those who scream the loudest about threats to democracy are very silent when it comes to the will of the majority here being ignored. In fact, they seem to be doing a lot to obstruct the will of the majority. Now, let's talk about President Joe Biden, who's repeating a verifiable lie about inflation. He's repeated a lot of verifiable lies over the years. He's saying that it was 9% when he came to office, when it was actually 1.4%. Karine Jean-Pierre was asked to explain why the president's repeated this lie.
We got a lot of incoming on this yesterday. And look, what the president was, the point that he was making is that the factors that caused inflation was in place when he walked into the administration, when he took office. As you know, the pandemic caused inflation around the world.
Douglas, I know the US has much bigger issues to deal with right now, the border crisis, cost of living, crime, but a president who can't stop lying about verifiable data, I mean, it's not something to be overlooked.
Well, I would just say that, the point of the White House spokesperson is meant to be to sort of be the mouthpiece of the president. Joe Biden has found a mouthpiece in Karine Jean-Pierre, which I think even he must wonder at times whether what she's saying isn't gobbledygook or not. She's by no means the best interpreter of Joe Biden's statements, and goodness knows sometimes Joe Biden could do with a good interpreter. Yes, I mean, this is the sort of behavior which, if it happened under a Republican president, it would all be, fact-checking the fact-checkers, and the Washington Post would be explaining to everyone how democracy dies in darkness, and the BBC's Verify fact-checked czar would be onto it. But, old Joe Biden, it doesn't matter, and it can all be explained away incoherently by his spokesperson.
Yeah, I felt a little bit sorry for her, because how do you defend that? And but her explanation did not help the president or herself in any way.
It could have been worse, of course. It could have been explained by Kamala Harris, who would have explained that the thing is that that the past has just gone before the present and the future is yet to come. And in a very real sense, the present is before the future. And that's why inflation is there.
And then we would just have mad cackling for about 60 seconds after that. But let's stick with the Biden White House, their incoherent and inconsistent decision-making. Douglas, you've written about this, about how the president says something that's very sound 1 minute, and the next day he does something that's completely at odds with that. You talked about the wise words he said last week about Israel. And then within hours, he was attempting to prevent Israel's victory in Gaza by withholding arms shipments. How do you explain this erratic behaviour?
Well, it's very strange. I mean, the best interpretation of it is that for some time, and you and I have discussed this before, Rita, for some time the president has talked a bit of one talk and acted in another way. Now, for those of us who want Israel to win in Gaza against Hamas, sometimes, you know, that's the rhetoric has been unpleasant, but the actions have been supportive. So, for instance, at various times, President Biden, we presume, has sent out, for instance, Chuck Schumer to be critical of the Israeli reaction. Occasionally, Joe Biden has been critical himself, but he's done that in order, it seems, to placate a bit of the base in his own party, keep the students from going bananas all the time on campus, and hope to get in November, whilst at the same time supporting America's ally, Israel. The thing that was different this past week has been that it flipped exactly the other way around. The rhetoric from the president on the day was very good, very supportive, all about standing by our allies and all that sort of thing. And then in the evening, he stopped the delivery of arms supplies to Israel. Now, that is a very serious development, because a lot of the sort of the talk, the chaff of the media cycle, particularly in America, you know, is performative. It's for the base. It's for a certain bit of the base. It's for the 3 or 4 people watching some of the smaller left-wing networks. But the really difficult thing here, as I say, is that he actually did something which he had always said he wouldn't do. He's always held himself out as a great ally of Israel in its fight for survival and its fight for victory over its enemies. And here he is in charge in the White House, withholding arms at a time when Israel is pretty close to victory against Hamas. How you can say you're an ally and you're with someone till the bitter end, only to drop out at about last orders, I just do not know.
And that's what worries me, because as we know, actions are more important than words, and he has flipped that dynamic. And what would happen to Israel if they don't defeat Hamas after 7 months of this war, if in the end Hamas isn't completely eradicated?
Well, my view is, and I think it's a view that a lot of Israeli politicians and others feel, a lot of the Israeli public feel, is that you cannot destroy 80% of Hamas. You cannot leave them in, you cannot take them out of Gaza City, and you cannot take them out of a set of other towns and so on, and leave them intact in Rafah. And Rafah is reckoned to be not just where the remaining Israeli hostages are held, hostages who the rest of the world seems to have forgotten about, but the Israeli people quite rightly haven't. And there's no point in leaving that there and leaving those people there and leaving the heads of Hamas, including, it seems, Sinwar, the mastermind of the 7th, in Rafah. All it means is like putting out 80% of the fire, that the Israelis will withdraw from Gaza, and Hamas will grow back, will continue to subjugate the Palestinian population in Gaza, will continue to enrich themselves, and will prepare for the next attack against Israel. And my prediction is that these, every other year wars that Hamas has been provoking since it took control of the Gaza would just go on in that scenario. I think it is much better for the Israeli public and indeed for the Palestinian public in Gaza that Hamas are done for, that it's over, and that other partners in the region can help in whatever way they can to rebuild the society there. It is not going to be an easy job, but it will be infinitely harder if Hamas still have any kind of a stronghold. So preventing Israeli victory, once again, would lead only to another set of cycles of conflict. And I don't think that's desirable.
No, it's not desirable for either party, as you explained. One thing we have seen in Israel, though, is the willingness of its people to fight for their country. Young people are willing to risk their lives to defend their country. That's not a sentiment that is shared in the West. In the UK, only a quarter of young people, 27%, said they were willing to be enlisted to defend their country. And one doesn't, I guess, Douglas, seek to protect what one doesn't value. And there's certainly a deep sense of self-loathing among many young people for their own country, whether we're talking about the UK, the US, or right here in Australia. What can be done to combat that? I feel that's such a destructive force with all sorts of long-term dangers.
Well, it has huge long-term dangers, and I spoke a bit when I was in Australia recently. But I mean, the recent referendum in Australia was a very, very important blow to the people who would like to make all people in Western democracies, only in Western democracies, feel utterly wretched about everything about us. To make everybody in the majority feel that we're usurpers and colonizers and genocidists and all of these other outrageous claims, always claims made against the most free and the most fair societies on earth. But this has been done for more than a generation now. You tell young Australians that they have no right to the land. You tell young Americans that they're just there because they usurped the native peoples. You tell Europeans, even when they are the native peoples, that although they are the native peoples, they should be themselves usurped. Go on and on like that. And of course, you're going to have a lot of young people who think, well, why on earth would I risk my life for a country I've been told is rotten from the beginning? I think we need to turn this whole thing around, and I think it can be turned around. The young Israelis have shown it can be turned around. They've shown that when it really comes to brutal reality in your face, you can stand up and fight. And the young Israelis have. I hope that it never comes to that for young Australians and Americans and Canadians and British and Europeans. But if it did, that we would be tested. And I think a lot of people would fail that test because they've been taught to fail that test.
They have. Then we've had this poison in academia and elsewhere for decades. So I'm glad you believe it can be turned around. I do have my doubts. Now, before you go, I've got to ask you about this ongoing sham trial of former President Donald Trump. It's continuing in Manhattan. We've had Stormy Daniels testify. Much of her testimony, salacious details that are completely irrelevant to the case. We've had serial perjurer Michael Cohen on the stand, and it seems everyone is resigned to the fact that this is some sort of a show trial. It's a political case as much as anything. Former federal prosecutor Andrew C. McCarthy wrote in the New York Post that New Yorkers should be outraged at the mockery District Attorney Alvin Bragg is making of the state's legal system as the entire country looks on. Douglas, the entire country is looking on, but whatever the Democrats are trying to achieve here seems to be backfiring because the polls are pretty clear. Trump is increasing his lead, particularly in those crucial swing states.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary miscalculation by Democrat prosecutors and others. As you say, as these trials go on, Trump's lead seems to strengthen. Some people outside America might wonder why that is, and I think it's a couple of things. One is a lot of Americans have had bad experiences with the justice system, and so the idea that the justice system can be in some way rigged is a claim that they're sort of open to in a way that I think in Australia and Britain we sort of wouldn't be. But the second is that you see people like DA Bragg effectively putting on a trial in search of a crime, and that's what this trial has been. It's a trial in search of a crime, and Stormy Daniels took the stand not because she had anything new to say, although she did actually contradict previous testimony she'd given, but because, of course, it was meant to humiliate Donald Trump. There were salacious details. And, frankly, I mean, most people would be humiliated to hear even these allegations made against him, or against themselves. Trump, as ever, amazingly, sort of has this ability to brush it off. If I were the Democrats and others, I would start to be worrying about this whole tactic of let's take him out by judicial means. There's all sorts of criticisms that can be made in every direction here. But the ultimate issue in America is the people. The people get to decide. They get to decide who to vote for and eventually who they do vote for. It's not up to DA Bragg. It's not up to anyone else. It's up to the American public. And they may yet surprise the world.
Well, I think that's what the Democrats are scared of. They don't want the American public to decide. And I think they were counting on a criminal conviction sealing the deal. But I don't think even if that eventuates, it's going to make a difference. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Great pleasure as always. Thank you.
Still to come, lefties losing us. Plus, what is the most powerful interest group we've seen in this country? Nick Cater joins me from Finland. Welcome back. It's time for Lefties Losing It. And I've featured this trans activist and self-indulgent narcissist previously. You'll remember him because he harassed waiters who misgendered him.
I use she, her pronouns. I'm not sir. Oh, so sorry. Yeah, like it's like a knife in the heart. I did specifically ask ahead of time not to be called sir. Yeah, I'm just gonna go. Okay. The sweet water starts at okay.
I'm so sorry. I apologize.
It's just always like a knife. It always hurts every single time. I was wondering if there's a manager I could talk to about something that happened. Yeah, I was called sir. Thank you. I'm not sir.
Oh, sorry.
Not sir. Not sir. The guy who dropped the food off, he called me sir twice in a row.
Yes, that attention-seeking activist has taken a break from complaining about minimum wage workers misgendering him to film this depravity at Disneyland, of all places. Listen to this description of forthcoming surgeries.
I'm going to get banned from Disney. I swear, we're about to get banned from Disney. Last summer, I got my cake pops removed, and the plan up until recently was to get my marshmallow wand reconfigured into a marshmallow tunnel. Unfortunately, a few weeks ago, I noticed some hair regrowth on my marshmallow wand. That's bad because the outside of the wand is what becomes the inside of the tunnel, so you don't want hair growing there or else it's very uncomfortable. So I talked to my surgeon and he said that it would be best to postpone the procedure until after hair removal is complete. This is obviously disappointing because I was really excited to have a marshmallow tunnel sooner. That being said, it is still happening. We're just not sure when it's happening. Hair removal is a fickle thing and it's really hard to predict when it will finish. But my hair removal technician thinks it will be before the end of the year. So, fingers crossed.
That is the definition of TMI, too much information. Oh, now, I must confess, when I first saw this next clip, I was convinced it was a fake, a deep fake, a work of parody, AI perhaps. Surely this couldn't be real. Surely someone working in academia couldn't be so semi-literate to the point where they can't even pronounce the names of their students, the simplest of names, including the school's name, Thomas Jefferson University. This is what happened at the school's College of Nursing graduation ceremony. Listen to how this presenter mispronounces the easiest of names. The first graduate we'll see there is called Megan Aubrey.
Mijinlu Iabri. Jessica Lynn Bower. Aliyah Benamon. Alisuna Cole Bishop. Victoria Lee Zupathros.
So we have badly mangled names like Elizabeth, Alison, Jessica. Surely it can't get worse. But it can. Listen to her try to pronounce Molly Elizabeth.
Marlena Zubath Kamp. Allison Care Camp Bull. Tamulme Thomas.
Thomas. The kid's name is Thomas. He's graduating from Thomas Jefferson University. Thomas Jefferson must be spinning in his grave as we speak. Now, there has been an apology from the university, and the explanation they gave is that the presenters' cards had phonetic spellings of the graduates' names, really Thomas and Molly and Alison, that they need special... I'm not buying the explanation. I don't know what was going on there. I'm always mispronouncing things, but, you know, English is a second language. That's a good excuse. That wasn't the case there. The whole catastrophe reminds me of this classic roll call sketch from Key and Peele.
Balake. Where is Balake at? There's no Balake here today. Yes, sir.
My name's Blake.
Are you out of your goddamn mind? Now, D nice.
Do you mean Denise?
Son of You say your name right now.
Denise?
Say it right.
Denise.
Correctly.
Denise.
Right.
Denise.
Right.
D-nice.
That's better. Thank you.
Now, remember when trans activist Dylan Mulvaney escaped to Peru to get away from the hate in America?
Okay, surprise! I'm in Peru, and I'm at Machu Picchu. Isn't this just so beautiful? I'm here by myself. I've seen a lot of llamas, and the people here are so kind. I feel very safe here. It's a little sad that I had to leave my country to feel safe, but that will get better eventually. And I am dying for some Trader Joe's rolled chili lime chips, but other than that, I am so content. Still haven't been kissed yet, but I'm holding out hope. And most of all, you know, this trip has me feeling like I'm my own best friend again. And that is the best feeling in the world. And I hope that you feel that way about yourself too.
But we haven't heard from Dylan since Peru officially classified transgender, non-binary and intersex people as mentally ill. It's a decision that has been slammed by LGBTQ plus activist groups across Peru, who say it is a major step backward in the fight for their rights and safety. Now to an old ad that has gone viral again, and one can understand why. Here is a Malaysian shampoo commercial that is, well, it's different.
Pati 50 disari dengan nutrisi agar kulit kepala dan rambut kekal sihat dan harum sentiasa.
Good Lord, even the Taliban can't be upset by that. Modesty first. Now let's go to Santiago, Chile, where these women are dancing for Palestine. If they dressed and danced like this in Gaza, they'd be shot by Hamas, but go crazy, ladies. And we do regularly feature the ladies of The View in this portion of the show. They say so many stupid things, but it's not just the female hosts. Their guests, male or female, also tend to say stupid stuff. Here is ABC host and Democrat operative George Stephanopoulos admitting that the deep state is real and it's beautiful.
And these are people that come, they're relatively young, people who come from all over the government, the CIA, the DIA, Defense Department, military. And, you know, some people like to call those people the deep state.
Deep state.
Well, the big thing I learned doing this book is that the deep state is packed with patriots. People who go to work every single day on the front lines of the most intense crises the country faces and do it to serve their country.
It wasn't too long ago that if you mentioned the deep state, you'd be called some crazy conspiracy theorist, but here we are. George says they exist and they're patriots. Patriots who hate America. Now to a couple of funny comics who are off the left, but they're still droll and clever and generally liked by all sides of politics. Bill Burr and Bill Maher came together for Maher's podcast, but it didn't go as well as you'd expect.
First of all, I don't think you could change the oil in a car, so don't talk about f***ing architecture
I can't, and I wouldn't want to.
Oh, let me adjust my glasses. Can I tell you something, Bill? Most of the that you say is not smart. It's just sort of obscure.
It's not obscure to a certain percentage of people. I'm
people that are at your
not some
altitude.
giant egghead. I'm just
I know you're not that smart.
Those two don't seem to like each other. I don't think that whole weirdly passive-aggressive dynamic was put on. It seemed real to me. Joining me now is Senior Fellow at the Menzies Research Centre, journalist and author Nick Cater. Nick, you wrote a fascinating piece for the Australian newspaper on what may be the most powerful interest group we've seen yet. You wrote, Australian registered environmental charities receive hundreds of millions in revenue each year. This tax-advantaged honeypot is fueling the rapid expansion of ecological activism and lawfare, making it nearly impossible to open a new coal mine or drill for gas. Tell me how these schemes work and who is taking advantage of them.
Well, the amount of money that's going into environmental charities, and all these are tax advantaged, right? You get a tax donation for giving to these bodies. It's now around about $250 million a year, and that's gone up by more than twice in the last 4 or 5 years. And they're employing thousands of staff. There are thousands of people employed full-time working for environmental charities. So that's how the Green left gets so active with their lawfare and their campaigning and their social media and setting up all sorts of little astroturf groups to argue their cause for climate change. They are tremendously influential. And most of this money that I've been able to trace comes in some way or another from people invested in the renewable energy sector, right? So it's Mike Cannon-Brookes, for instance, who is a big investor in renewable energy. He's got his own charity, which has got about $30 million in it, sorry. But then you can follow that through and you can trace the money, including worryingly a lot of money which appears to be coming from the United States and Europe. So funds like the World Wildlife Fund, for instance, take money from Europe. And a lot of them take money from a body called the Sunrise Foundation, which has about 70 or 80 $1 million budget in Australia, and that's linked to a body in the United States. So as where it comes from, it's pretty murky, Rita, but as far as you can trace it back, it all seems to end up with people who basically want wind and solar and hate nuclear.
Well, you mentioned the World Wildlife Fund. They did get a massive donation from tech billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes' charity, Boundless Earth. But as you mentioned, they also received significant funds from the overseas sources, including the European Climate Foundation, one of Europe's biggest bankrollers of climate activism. The question is there, Nick, why are they investing money? What is expected in return for the largesse?
Well, the one thing that's expected is that you do not support nuclear and you do not support gas. You have to get on board with this renewable-only future. And you can see why that is. I mean, if you're somebody, one of these people that have invested heavily in renewable energy, your portfolio is shot to pieces the moment we change the law in this country that we can, or in Australia, so we can have nuclear, right? Because you're not going to need intermittent, or not so much of this intermittent wind, So that's why this is big money for them. It is worth them putting millions into fighting nuclear, which is what they're going to do at the next election. Because if they lose that battle, then they're going to be toast. So that's basically it. It's money, Rita. It's money that's driving this, and the environmental groups in Australia, almost all of them, certainly the big ones, are all on board with this renewable-only, Chris Bowen sort of madness, because they're getting the funding from those bodies. They don't dare come out and make the sensible choice, which is for nuclear.
Well, we know why those who have invested heavily in renewables are behind this sort of activism and these sort of strategies. But when you're talking about the environmental groups who are supposed to be motivated by caring for the environment, for slashing emissions, how could they possibly justify being anti-nuclear power when, if you want to dramatically reduce emissions without destroying living standards, nuclear is the only option right now? I mean, we could develop some new technology in the next decade or two, but right now, renewables aren't going to get you there because there's no baseload power.
I'm in Finland at the moment, which is why this beautiful backdrop, Rita, and here everybody is on board with nuclear. The Greens, the left, everybody. In public opinion polls, about 6% of people oppose it. And I interviewed a member of the Greens party yesterday who was telling me, well, of course we're for nuclear, because it's the quickest way to get to zero emissions. If that's your thing, you can do it that way. And they are doing it here, 95% carbon-free electricity. Right, so they're doing it. They've proved, they've walked the walk, and they've shown it works. But in Australia, the green groups are just in cloud cuckoo land. They just spout this stuff. Absolutely. I just don't really think in the end they really do want to get to net zero. They just want to be seen to be the people fighting to get to net zero, Rita. That's the point, isn't it? Because if they wanted to get to net zero, of course they'd go for nuclear. It's the obvious way.
And in Scandinavia, not just Finland, Sweden, it's used widely. Beautiful part of the world. Nick Cater, enjoy. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Still to come, cancelled Kevin Spacey is about to be uncancelled as a host of Hollywood A-listers come out in support of him. Plus, a Hollywood star explains why so many celebrities are afraid to express right-wing views. Kinsey Schofield is up next. Welcome back. I'm joined now by celebrity and royal commentator Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, we spoke about Kevin Spacey last week after he broke his silence with that remarkable 90-minute tell-all interview with Dan Wooten. And now we've got Hollywood actors coming out in support of the Oscar winner, Sharon Stone, Liam Neeson and Stephen Fry are among those campaigning for Kevin Spacey to return to acting after what's been really 7 years of a horror run in exile where he was cancelled over allegations that have not stood up in court in criminal or civil cases.
That's right. And I do think that it's important to note that when somebody like Liam Neeson or Sharon Stone puts themselves out there and defends him, Neeson specifically saying that Kevin Spacey is a good man and a man of character, their industry needs him and misses him greatly. What they're doing is they're putting themselves on the line. And I think that it's important to note that they all of these celebrities are so fearful of canceling or of catching cancellation, and the fact that they are standing up for him and saying, this is ridiculous, let's put this guy back to work. I think it means a lot to Kevin Spacey, but I also think a lot of people are going to take note of it that can put Kevin Spacey back to work.
You're right, Kinsey. It's brave to take a stand even now. If you're going to be super critical, you'd say, where were these actors in the past 7 years when Kevin was being cancelled? But I think so many people, including myself, who've watched that 90-minute interview with Kevin Spacey and looked at some of these allegations and what's transpired, have changed their mind about this. Perhaps even those of us who should know better jump to conclusions way too quickly. Let's talk more about Hollywood. Emmy-winning actress Dre DeMatteo has told Donald Trump Jr. during a podcast that There are many well-known celebrities, including herself, who are opposed to President Joe Biden's agenda, but they're hesitant to voice their opinions.
And people in Hollywood are petrified. What are you going to speak out against race and sex and all of that stuff? People are afraid to have those conversations because, first of all, you never win with a liberal. Yeah. You're just never going to win.
Kinsey, she's right, but we do have plenty of celebrities who are eager to voice leftist political opinions, and they're getting louder and louder right now on social media, from Susan Sarandon to Barbara Streisand to Robert De Niro.
Yeah, I think when it comes to politics, you know, this is a polarizing rematch, Trump versus Biden, and the stakes are very high. So I do feel like you're seeing a lot of celebrities that we typically see in our faces around this time, like Taylor Swift, disengage. But don't forget, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson endorsed Biden in 2020, but recently argued that he won't make that mistake again. He told Fox and Friends, the endorsement that I made years ago with Biden was one that I thought was the best decision for me at the time. Am I going to do that again this year? The answer is no, I'm not going to do that. Musician Macklemore recently released a scathing song tearing into Joe Biden, saying, "I will not be voting for you this fall." But here we are in June, celebrity-fueled Los Angeles fundraiser starring George Clooney and Julia Roberts. So some are bailing, and then there are some that I guess I would consider in the shameless category, trying to prop up this 80-year-old man.
Oh, there are many of them. The fundraisers, the public endorsements, and also the social media activism. Some of the things these celebrities post on social media, you would think if you were their publicist, you would be having a heart attack. Now, to the battle between A-listers Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Their breakup was very ugly indeed, and there's claims that Angelina Jolie has encouraged the children to avoid spending time with their father. Kinsey, tell me the latest on this saga and what we've learned from the latest legal proceedings.
Absolutely. And this accusation sounds very credible. We heard it last week. It's a former security guard. And he told the Superior Court that Angelina Jolie attempted to turn her 6 children against their father, Brad Pitt, by instructing them to reject him during custody visits. The witness said that Angelina fired him after 2 of his freelance security associates sided with Brad Pitt during the split and agreed to testify against her on Brad's behalf during custody hearings. Now, Brad's attorney is accusing Jolie of using NDAs inappropriately and almost in a threatening manner towards those security guards as the couple were battling it out for their Chateau winery, champagne problems.
Champagne problems indeed. Now, I may have missed their latest films, but are they both working a lot less than they once did? Is this impacting their public image and their career?
I think it is for Angelina Jolie because she comes off as very bitter and negative. You know, we just found out Shiloh could be moving in with Brad Pitt once she turns 18. Brad has a beautiful young new girlfriend. He is busy and working. Angelina kind of leading more into charity work. But I do think that this divorce has hurt her brand. And then on top of that, like you said, she's very outspoken politically. She's got her father, John Voight, saying, "I'm voting for Trump 2024. And she just kind of looks problematic and toxic. Meanwhile, Brad is like casually walking along the beaches with his dogs, and he's beautiful, and he just looks unbothered.
He does look unbothered. Perhaps too unbothered, Kinsey Schofield. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
That's it from me. Newsnight is up next. I'll see you tomorrow at 9:30 for a whole program devoted to lefties losing it. Good night.